John Kennedy, mocked by snobby elite, only for them to discover he's 100 times richer than them. The St. Charles Hotel in New Orleans stood as a monument to Southern grandeur. Its grand ballroom ablaze with the glow of crystal chandeliers that cast intricate patterns across polished mahogany floors. On this balmy evening, the city's most exclusive charity gala was in full swing, a spectacle of wealth and ambition cloaked in the noble guise of philanthropy. Women in shimmering gowns, silk chiffons, and hand-stitched velvets moved through the crowd like rare jewels, their diamond earrings and sapphire necklaces catching the light. Men in bespoke tuxedos, their cufflinks engraved with family crests, traded quips and business cards, their laughter mingling with the soft strains of a jazz quartet. The air carried the faint sweetness of magnolias, undercut by the sharp tang of bourbon and the unspoken competition for social dominance. Tonight's cause, a new community library to serve New Orleans' underserved neighborhoods, was a worthy one. But for most attendees, it was secondary to the real purpose to see and be seen to cement their place in the city's elite. At the heart of this glittering tableau stood Amelia Wentworth, her emerald gown clinging to her frame with couture precision, its deep green hue accentuating her poised elegance. Her auburn hair, swept into a sleek updo, was pinned with a single sapphire that gleamed like a cold flame. Beside her, Evelyn Harper adjusted the delicate straps of her burgundy dress, while Lillian Dubois, in a cream satin ensemble, sipped her martini with an air of practiced indifference. These women were the gatekeepers of New Orleans high society, their influence as unyielding as the Spanish moss draped over the city's ancient oaks. This library better have a donor with some real clout. Amelia murmured, her voice sharp as she scanned the room. Last year's gala was practically a disgrace. Some nobody from the suburbs got top billing. Evelyn's lips curled into a smirk. If I'm dropping $15,000 a plate, I expect a name that carries weight. Not another flash in the pan philanthropist. Lillian nodded, her gaze drifting to a group of oil executives near the bar. Let's hope the boards learned their lesson. As the trio exchanged barbed pleasantries, a subtle shift in the crowd drew their attention. Heads turned toward the ballroom's grand entrance, where a man stood his presence, a quiet anomaly amidst the extravagance. John Neely Kennedy, a United States Senator from Louisiana, cut a modest figure in a navy suit that lacked the tailored sheen of the room's sartorial standards. His red tie slightly off-center, and his graying hair combed neatly but without artifice, gave him the look of a small-town attorney rather than a gala-worthy luminary. His weathered face, etched with lines from years of public service, held a faint knowing smile as he surveyed the scene with clear, observant eyes. To the uninitiated, he might have been mistaken for a lost guest, someone who had wandered into the wrong event. Amelia's gaze zeroed in on him, her lips parting in a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Who invited him?" she whispered, her tone slicing through the hum of conversation. Evelyn leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "In that suit, he looks like he's here to file paperwork, not bid on the auction." Lillian stifled a chuckle, her martini glass tilting. "Maybe he's with the hotel staff. That tie, my goodness, it's practically a museum piece." Their laughter, soft but cutting, drew a few glances, but John seemed unfazed, his attention drawn to a display of architectural renderings for the library positioned near a marble column. John moved through the crowd with an unhurried stride, his posture relaxed yet purposeful. In his 60s, he carried the quiet confidence of a man who had navigated both the back roads of Louisiana and the halls of Washington without losing his grounding. He paused at the display, his eyes tracing the blueprints with genuine interest. The library's design was bold yet practical. Open reading spaces bathed in natural light, a children's wing with interactive learning zones, and a community hub for job training. John's lips twitched into a smile as he studied the children's wing, his thoughts drifting to the kids in rural parishes who deserved a place to spark their imaginations. Back at the bar, Amelia and her friends continued their appraisal. "He's probably some minor official." Evelyn speculated, her voice dripping with condescension. "You know the type shows up for the free shrimp, then slips out before the pledges start." Amelia's eyes gleamed with mischief. "Let's find out who he is. I could use a little amusement." She smoothed her gown and glided toward John, Evelyn, and Lillian, trailing like a polished entourage. As they approached, John turned his smile warm but reserved. "Evening, ladies," he said, his Louisiana drawl rich with the cadence of bayou nights, a sound that felt out of place in the ballroom's refined air. Amelia extended a gloved hand, her diamond bracelet sparkling. "Amelia Wentworth," she said, her voice smooth but laced with scrutiny. "I don't believe we've met." John shook her hand with a firm, unpretentious grip. "John Kennedy," he replied, offering no further credentials. Amelia's smile tightened as she assessed him, her eyes flicking to his suit, searching for a hint of prestige and finding none. "And what brings you to our gala, Mr. Kennedy?" she asked, her tone suggesting his presence demanded explanation. "Are you with the city planners?" "Perhaps." John's eyes twinkled with a hint of amusement, as if he saw through her probe but chose not to engage. "Just here to support the library," he said, nodding toward the blueprints. "It's gonna do a lot of good for the kids in this city." "That's the heart of it, ain't it?" His sincerity was unexpected, but Amelia pressed on. "Of course," she said, her voice syrupy, "though this event is rather exclusive. We don't often see new faces." Evelyn stepped forward, her burgundy gown shimmering. "Indeed, our donors tend to move in elevated circles. The library's a big project. Most pledges start in the six figures." Lillian chimed in, her tone falsely kind. "Your suit, Mr. Kennedy, is it a classic cut? It's so understated." The jab was deliberate, but John's expression remained steady, his smile unshaken. "Just something I threw on," he said, deflecting with ease. "Fancy clothes ain't my thing when there's a job to do." Amelia's eyes narrowed, sensing a challenge in his calm. "How refreshing," she said, her voice making simplicity sound like a flaw. "We were just about to join Victor Langston, last year's top donor, $10 million for the Opera House. Perhaps you'd care to meet him. Victor loves diverse perspectives." The invitation was a test meant to expose John's presumed inadequacy, but he nodded agreeably. "Sounds fine," he said, his drawl steady. "Always good to meet folks who care about the community." As Amelia led the way, she shot a subtle glance at her friends, her lips curling in a private smirk. Whispers trailed them. "Who's the old-timer? Did he borrow that suit? He's so out of his depth." John, however, seemed untouched, his gaze drifting back to the library display as they passed. He paused to address Dr. Margaret Ellison, the project's director, who was adjusting a placard. "That community hub's a smart addition," he said, his voice earnest. "Gives folks a place to build skills, not just read." Dr. Ellison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, nodded appreciatively. "You've got a knack for this, Mr. Kennedy. We're hoping it'll be a game-changer." John's smile deepened. "It will be if the kids get a fair shot." Amelia, irked by the detour, cleared her throat. "Mr. Kennedy, we really mustn't keep Victor waiting." She gestured toward a cluster of men near the stage, where Victor Langston, a silver-haired shipping magnate, held court with a cigar in hand. As they approached, Victor's eyes skimmed, John dismissing him in an instant. "Amelia, you're stunning," he said, kissing her hand. "Who's this?" Amelia's smile was razor-thin. "John Kennedy," she said, emphasizing the lack of a title. "He's enthusiastic about the library." Victor raised an eyebrow, his gaze lingering on John's tie. Is he now? Well, enthusiasm's nice, but it's the big checks that build libraries. His cronies chuckled, the sound exclusive and cold. John merely smiled, his hands clasped loosely. Checks help, he agreed. But it's the kids who'll make that library shine. The sentiment was genuine, but it landed awkwardly in the group's cynicism. Victor gave a condescending nod. Quaint. So, Kennedy, what's your line? Local government, non-profit. Before John could answer, Amelia interjected, her voice bright with feigned interest. Yes, do tell. Community organizer, perhaps. The question was a trap, but John's eyes met hers, a glint of quiet defiance in them. Bit of public work, he said, deliberately vague. Tonight, I'm just here for the library. His answer frustrated Amelia's attempt to box him in, and she exchanged a glance with Evelyn, who smirked. Public work, Lillian echoed, her tone mockingly sweet. How admirable. Every bit helps, I suppose. John's smile held his calm unshaken. Every bit, does he said. But it's the why behind it that matters. The conversation fizzled, Amelia's barbs failing to rattle him. Well, Mr. Kennedy, enjoy the evening, she said, turning away, her friend's laughter trailing like a delicate slap. John watched them go, then returned to the library, display his thoughts elsewhere. Dr. Ellison approached, her eyes sharp. They're a tough crowd, she said, her tone dry. John chuckled. I've faced worse. They're not why I'm here. He nodded at the blueprints. This is... Dr. Ellison's respect deepened. You're not what I expected, she admitted. John's smile was wry. Good. Keeps things interesting. As the gala hummed on, John stood apart, a quiet enigma whose true influence, forged through decades of service and investment, would soon turn the room's assumptions upside down, setting the stage for a revelation that would challenge everything Amelia held dear. The grand ballroom of the St. Charles Hotel pulsed with the rhythm of New Orleans elite, their laughter and clinking glasses weaving a tapestry of privilege under the glow of crystal chandeliers. The gala was in full swing, the air thick with the scent of jasmine perfume and the buzz of calculated small talk. Amelia Wentworth, resplendent in her emerald gown, stood near the bar, her sapphire pin glinting as she leaned toward Evelyn Harper and Lillian Dubois. Their earlier encounter with John Kennedy, the unassuming man in the plain navy suit, had become the evening's most delicious morsel of gossip. Can you believe he called himself a public servant? Amelia said, her voice low but sharp with mockery. As if that explains his presence here. I swear he's probably a clerk who won a raffle ticket to the gala. Evelyn smirked, twirling a strand of her crimson gown's lace. Or maybe he's here to pitch some small-town fundraiser. Did you see that tie? I bet it's older than my vintage Chanel. Lillian, sipping her champagne, tilted her head toward the crowd. He's over there, talking to Dr. Ellison again. Honestly, what could they possibly have to discuss? Library shelving budgets. The women laughed, their voices blending with the hum of the room, their disdain, a polished weapon wielded with precision. John, oblivious to the scrutiny, stood near the library display, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, as he listened to Dr. Margaret Ellison describe the community outreach programs planned for the new library. His Louisiana drawl softened his questions, but they were incisive, revealing a depth of understanding that surprised even the seasoned director. You've got after-school tutoring in the plan, he noted, his eyes scanning the blueprint. Any thought to adding mentorship for the older kids? Pair 'em with professionals who can show 'em what's possible. Dr. Ellison raised an eyebrow, impressed. That's a fine idea, Mr. Kennedy. We've got the space, but funding for staffing's tight. Mentorship programs need consistent commitment. John nodded, his expression thoughtful. Commitment's the key, all right. Kids need folks who show up, not just write checks. His words carried a quiet conviction rooted in a life spent navigating both the struggles of Louisiana's working class and the corridors of power. Dr. Ellison studied him, sensing there was more to this man than his modest appearance suggested. But before she could probe further, a commotion near the bar drew their attention. Amelia, gesturing animatedly to her friends, had just reached into her clutch for her phone when she froze, her face paling. "My wallet?" she whispered, her voice tinged with panic. "It's gone. I had it when we were at the silent auction table." Evelyn's eyes widened. "Are you sure you were bidding on that Caribbean cruise package, weren't you?" Amelia nodded, rifling through her clutch with increasing urgency. "It's not here. My cards, my ID, everything's in there." Lillian placed a calming hand on her arm. "Don't make a scene, darling. Let's retrace your steps. It's probably on the auction table." The trio moved toward the auction area, their heels clicking against the mahogany floor, their earlier confidence replaced by a flicker of unease. As they passed, John Amelia's gaze darted toward him, a fleeting suspicion crossing her mind. "You don't think—" she murmured to Evelyn, her voice barely audible. Evelyn followed her gaze, her lips pursing. "That man, he doesn't look like a thief, but who knows he's so out of place here?" Lillian shook her head. "Let's not jump to conclusions. We'll find it." Unbeknownst to them, John had overheard the tail end of their conversation as he stepped away from the library display. His sharp eyes caught the glint of something beneath a chair near the auction table, a slim leather wallet embossed with Amelia's initials. Without drawing attention, he bent down, retrieved it, and slipped it into his pocket. He scanned the room, spotting Amelia and her friends whispering urgently near the auction items. Rather than approach them directly, he made his way to a server, a young man balancing a tray of canapés. "Excuse me," John said, his voice low. "That lady over there in the green dress, she dropped this. Could you make sure it gets back to her?" "No need to mention me." He handed over the wallet, his movements discreet. The server nodded slightly, puzzled but compliant. "Yes, sir. I'll take care of it." John gave a small nod and returned to the library display, his expression unchanged, as if the act of kindness was as routine as tying his shoes. Moments later, the server approached Amelia, holding out the wallet. "Ma'am, this was found near the auction table. I believe it's yours." Amelia's eyes widened, relief flooding her features as she took it. "Oh, thank you. Where was it?" The server hesitated, glancing toward John's direction, but remembering his instructions. "Just under a chair, ma'am. Lucky find." Amelia clutched the wallet, her suspicion of John lingering but overshadowed by her relief. "Well, thank goodness," she said, forcing a smile. "I must have been careless." Evelyn leaned in, her voice conspiratorial. "Careless? Or did someone try to make a point that Kennedy fellow was awfully close to the table earlier?" Amelia's jaw tightened, her earlier amusement replaced by a mix of embarrassment and doubt. "Maybe. But let's not make a fuss. We've got bigger fish to fry tonight." As the gala continued, the whispers about John spread like wildfire. A group of bankers near the stage speculated that he was a retired teacher crashing the event for free hors d'oeuvres. A socialite in a sequined gown wondered aloud if he was a distant cousin of some minor local official invited out of pity. Amelia, emboldened by her friend's encouragement, decided to dig deeper. She approached Charles Beaumont, the real estate magnate who was now holding court near the jazz quartet. "Charles, darling," she said, her voice honeyed. "You know everyone worth knowing. Tell me, have you ever heard of a John Kennedy plain suit, Southern accent, claims to be in public service?" Charles swirled his scotch, his brow furrowing. "Kennedy doesn't ring a bell." Sounds like a nobody trying to rub elbows with the big dogs. Why he bothering you? Amelia shook her head, her smile tight. Not bothering, just curious. He's so out of place yet. He's chatting up Dr. Ellison like he owns the place. Charles chuckled, his tone patronizing, probably name-dropping to feel important. Don't waste your energy, Amelia. Focus on the real players. Meanwhile, John had moved to a quieter corner of the ballroom where he struck up a conversation with a young architect from the library project team. The architect, a nervous but enthusiastic man named Daniel, was explaining the challenges of designing a community space on a limited budget. We want it to be durable but inviting, Daniel said, gesturing animatedly. But every time we add something like extra windows for natural light, the costs creep up. John listened intently, his questions probing but encouraging. What if you used modular materials for the non-structural parts he suggested? Keeps costs down, but gives you flexibility for future expansions. Daniel blinked, surprised by the insight. That's actually a great idea. You know, construction. John shrugged, his smile easy. Picked up a thing or two over the years. Built a few projects myself back in the day. What John didn't mention was his extensive portfolio of real estate investments, from commercial complexes to affordable housing that had quietly amassed him a fortune far surpassing most in the room. Back at the bar, Amelia's group had regrouped their earlier panic over the wallet forgotten, but their fixation on John intensifying. I saw him talking to that architect Lillian, said her tone skeptical. What could he possibly know about building anything? He looks like he lives in a double wide. Evelyn laughed, but her eyes were sharp. Maybe he's trying to scam his way into a contract. You know how these types are always angling for something. Amelia's gaze followed John, her earlier amusement giving way to a nagging unease. There was something about his calm demeanor, his refusal to rise to their bait, that unsettled her. He's too comfortable, she murmured. Like he knows something we don't. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. What, you think he's some secret millionaire playing dress down? Please, Amelia. He's just a nobody with a good poker face. As the evening neared its midpoint, the gala's MC, a polished woman in a silver gown, took the stage to announce the silent auction results. The crowd quieted their attention, shifting to the promise of prestige that came with outbidding one another for luxury vacations and rare art. Amelia, Evelyn, and Lillian positioned themselves near the front, their expressions expectant, ready to bask in the glow of their social dominance. John, meanwhile, stood at the back, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed not on the stage, but on the library blueprints still visible in the corner. Dr. Ellison joined him, her clipboard now tucked away. You're not bidding on anything, she asked, her tone teasing but curious. John shook his head, his smile wry. Not much for cruises or fancy paintings. I'm here for the library, not the show. Dr. Ellison nodded her respect for him, growing. You're a rare one, Mr. Kennedy. Most folks here can't resist the spotlight. John's eyes crinkled with humor. Spotlight's overrated. I'd rather see the kids reading in that library than hear my name called out tonight. As the MC began reading the winning bids, Amelia's name was announced for the Caribbean cruise, prompting a polite round of applause. She smiled graciously, but her eyes darted toward John, half expecting to see him watching with envy. Instead, he was deep in conversation with Dr. Ellison, his focus unwavering. The slight irritated Amelia more than she cared to admit. He's insufferable, she whispered to Evelyn, acting like he's above it all. Evelyn nodded, her voice cold. Let him play his little game. By the end of the night, we'll know exactly who he is or isn't. Unbeknownst to them, the seeds of their misjudgment had already been sown, and the quiet man in the plain suit was about to turn their world upside down, revealing a truth that would challenge their assumptions and force them to confront the fragility of their carefully curated hierarchy. The St. Charles Hotel's grand ballroom shimmered with the opulence of New Orleans' elite, the chandeliers casting a golden glow over a sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. The gala had reached its crescendo, the silent auction concluded, and the air buzzed with anticipation as guests awaited the announcement of the evening's major donors for the new community library. Amelia Wentworth, her emerald gown catching the light, stood near the stage with Evelyn Harper and Lillian Dubois. Their champagne flutes freshly filled their expressions, a blend of confidence and curiosity. The trio had spent the evening dissecting John Kennedy, the unassuming man in the plain navy suit, dismissing him as a nobody who had stumbled into their exclusive world. Their whispers had fueled the crowd's gossip, painting John as a small-time bureaucrat or a misguided idealist out of place among the city's power players. Now, as the MC prepared to reveal the library's benefactors, Amelia leaned toward Evelyn, her voice low. "I bet Charles Beaumont's name tops the list again. 8 million last year, nobody's beating that." Evelyn nodded, her crimson gown rustling. "Unless one of the oil tycoons decided to show off, that Kennedy fellow certainly won't be on the wall." Lillian smirked, glancing toward John, who stood quietly at the back, his hands in his pockets, his attention fixed on the library blueprints. Can you imagine his name next to Beaumont's? It'd be a scandal. John, seemingly oblivious to the scrutiny, exchanged a few words with Dr. Margaret Ellison, the library project's director, who stood beside him with a knowing smile. His Louisiana drawl was soft but steady, his questions about the library's outreach programs revealing a depth of insight that had already earned Dr. Ellison's respect. "You're sure the computer lab's got enough bandwidth for the coding classes?" he asked, his eyes scanning the architectural rendering. Dr. Ellison nodded. "We've got it covered thanks to a generous grant. But your idea about mentorship programs, we're still working on funding for that." John's lips curved into a faint smile. "Keep me posted. Kids need role models as much as they need books." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that hinted at a personal stake in the project, a connection Dr. Ellison sensed but didn't yet fully understand. On stage, the MC, a poised woman in a silver gown, tapped the microphone, drawing the crowd's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice resonating with practiced gravitas. "Tonight marks a historic moment for New Orleans. The new community library will transform lives, offering hope and opportunity to our city's most underserved neighborhoods." The room quieted, jewelry glinting, as guests straightened, eager to hear whose names would be immortalized on the donor wall. Amelia and her friends positioned themselves prominently, their expressions expectant, ready to bask in the social capital that came with proximity to wealth and influence. The MC continued, "Before we unveil the donor wall, I must share an extraordinary development. For the first time in our gala's history, we've received a single donation so significant it has redefined our vision for the library." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, heads turning as guests exchanged speculative glances. Amelia's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. "Anonymous, probably," she whispered to Evelyn. "Some recluse wanting tax breaks without the spotlight." Evelyn nodded, but her gaze flickered toward John, a fleeting doubt crossing her face. The MC's voice rose, commanding attention. "This individual has contributed $20 million to ensure the library becomes a beacon of education and opportunity, with a special focus on the children's wing and community mentorship programs." Gasps echoed through the ballroom, the number staggering even the most jaded attendees. Charles Beaumont, the real estate magnate, nearly spilled his scotch, his brow furrowing as he calculated who could have outdone his own 7-figure pledge. Amelia's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips, her composure slipping. 20 million, she hissed to Lillian. Who has that kind of money and doesn't flaunt it? Lillian, clutching her pearls, shook her head. It's got to be one of the tech moguls. Or maybe a corporate fund. Across the room, Dr. Ellison's eyes widened, her gaze locking onto John, who remained calm, his expression betraying nothing but a faint, almost amused smile. The MC paused for effect, her smile broadening. While this donor initially wished to remain anonymous, they have graciously allowed us to acknowledge them tonight, as they are present in this very room. The crowd erupted in excited whispers, heads swiveling as guests scanned the ballroom for a likely candidate. Amelia straightened her mind, racing through her mental Rolodex of New Orleans' wealthiest families. It's probably the DuPonts, she murmured. They've been quiet lately, but they've got the means. Evelyn's eyes darted toward a cluster of bankers near the bar. Or the Morgans. They love these grand gestures. The MC raised a hand, silencing the speculation. This benefactor's commitment to education stems from a deeply personal place, she said. Growing up in a small Louisiana town, they faced challenges that could have limited their future. But through hard work and a belief in the power of knowledge, they built a legacy that now uplifts others. The words hung in the air, their simplicity striking a chord in the otherwise cynical room. The MC's gaze swept the crowd, landing at the back. Mr. John Kennedy, would you please join me on stage? The room fell silent, the collective shock so palpable it seemed to dim the chandeliers. Amelia's glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the mahogany floor. The sound swallowed by the stunned hush. Evelyn's mouth formed a perfect O, her crimson gown suddenly feeling too tight. Lillian clutched her pearls so tightly they threatened to snap. There must be another Kennedy, Evelyn whispered frantically, her voice trembling. But John was already moving his stride unhurried, his plain navy suit parting the sea of designer attire like a quiet rebuke. The crowd watched in disbelief as he ascended the stage, his weathered face calm, his eyes reflecting a quiet wisdom that made the room's ostentation feel hollow. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC announced, her voice warm with admiration. It is my honor to introduce Mr. John Neely Kennedy, United States Senator from Louisiana, and our lead benefactor for the new community library. The ballroom erupted in applause, but it was hesitant, tinged with confusion and embarrassment. Amelia's face burned, her earlier mockery replaying in her mind with devastating clarity. She had called his suit, Vintage questioned his presence, laughed at his drawl, all while standing in the shadow of a man whose wealth and influence dwarfed her own. The MC continued, Mr. Kennedy's $20 million contribution is the largest in our gala's history, ensuring that every child in New Orleans has access to a world-class library and the opportunities it brings. Dr. Ellison, still at the back, beamed with undisguised pride, her earlier conversations with John now making perfect sense. John stepped to the microphone, his posture relaxed, his drawl as steady as ever. Thank you, he began, his voice soft, but carrying over the crowd. When I was a boy in Zachary, Louisiana, we didn't have much, but there was a little library down the road, and those books showed me a world bigger than my own. They gave me a chance to dream. The room hung on his words, the social hierarchy momentarily forgotten as they glimpsed the man behind the plain suit. This library ain't just about books, he continued. It's about giving kids a place to grow, to learn to believe in themselves. That's worth more than any dollar amount. His simplicity was disarming, his sincerity a stark contrast to the room's calculated displays of wealth. Amelia's throat tightened, her earlier disdain replaced by a crushing sense of shame. She had judged him by his clothes, his accent, his lack of flash, never imagining the depth of his character or the scale of his resources. The MC invited John to unveil the donor wall, and as he pulled back the velvet curtain, the crowd gasped. His name stood at the top, etched in gold, followed by a list of other contributors whose pledges paled in comparison. But John's focus wasn't on the wall. His eyes drifted to the library blueprints, a quiet satisfaction in his gaze. As the applause faded, guests surged forward, suddenly eager to shake his hand, their earlier dismissal replaced by fawning admiration. Charles Beaumont, recovering his composure, clapped John on the shoulder. "Well played, Kennedy. You had us all fooled." John's smile was polite but guarded. "Wasn't trying to fool anyone," he said. "Just here to do some good." Amelia, still rooted to her spot, felt her world tilt. The man she had mocked as a nobody was a titan, his wealth built not on inherited privilege, but on shrewd investments in real estate and a lifetime of public service. Her own family's fortune, substantial though it was, seemed trivial by comparison. Dr. Ellison approached John as he stepped off the stage, her eyes crinkling with amusement. "I told you you'd surprise them," she said. John chuckled, the sound low and genuine. "Didn't do it for the surprise, Margaret. But I reckon it made a point." He glanced toward Amelia and her friends, who stood huddled in urgent conversation, their glances toward him a mix of mortification and calculation. Amelia's mind raced, replaying every barb she'd thrown, every laugh she'd shared at his expense. "How did we miss this?" she whispered to Evelyn, her voice barely audible. Evelyn, still reeling, shook her head. "He played us. All that public servant nonsense, he knew exactly what he was doing." Lillian, clutching her shattered composure, murmured, 20 million. "And we thought he was here for the canapes." As the crowd dispersed to view the library plans, Amelia remained frozen, her designer gown feeling garish in the wake of John's quiet power. She had built her world on appearances, measuring worth by wealth and status. Yet John had dismantled that world with a single act of generosity. His donation wasn't just about money. It was a statement about values, about prioritizing substance over spectacle. And as the gala continued, Amelia felt the first stirrings of self-reflection, a realization that her assumptions had not only been wrong, but had exposed a flaw in her own character, one she could no longer ignore. The New Orleans Community Library stood as a beacon of hope, its glass facade reflecting the vibrant blue of a Louisiana morning. Months had passed since the St. Charles Hotel Gala, where John Neely Kennedy, the unassuming senator from Louisiana, had stunned the city's elite with his $20 million donation, dismantling their shallow judgments and exposing the limits of their gilded world. Now the library buzzed with life. Children scampered through the children's wing, their giggles bouncing off walls, adorned with whimsical murals, while volunteers arranged chairs for the opening ceremony. The community hub, with its computer lab and job training rooms, hummed with potential, and a small courtyard bloomed with the first flowers of a children's garden. Amelia Wentworth, no longer the haughty socialite in an emerald gown, stood in the courtyard, her simple cotton dress dusted with soil, as she helped a group of kids plant marigold seedlings. Her once impeccable manicure was chipped, her auburn hair tied back in a loose braid, but her face glowed with a quiet contentment that had been absent at the gala. Nearby, Dr. Margaret Ellison, the library's director, sorted a stack of program flyers, her sharp eyes softening as she watched Amelia laugh with a young boy who'd just discovered a worm. "You're a natural with them," Dr. Ellison said, her voice warm. Amelia smiled, brushing dirt from her hands. "I'm learning, Margaret. Turns out kids don't care about your last name or your dress, they just want you to show up." Dr. Ellison nodded, a knowing glint in her eye. "Sounds like someone else we know." Across the atrium, John Kennedy knelt beside a girl named Lila, who clutched a book about marine life, her eyes wide as she pointed to a picture of a whale. Dressed in a faded plaid shirt and jeans, John looked every bit the approachable neighbor, his graying hair slightly tousled, his Louisiana drawl as steady as the Mississippi. "You think you'll dive with those whales someday?" he asked, his smile encouraging. Lila nodded vigorously. "I want to see 'em up close. They sing, you know." John chuckled, his eyes crinkling. "That they do. Keep reading, and you'll be out there listening to their songs in no time." The kids around him leaned in, drawn to his easy warmth, unaware that the man telling them stories was a senator whose wealth and influence had built the very walls around them. For Amelia, John's presence was a living reminder of the gala, where her cruel assumptions mocking his plain suit, his drawl, his seeming ordinariness had unraveled in the face of his $20 million pledge. That night had been a reckoning, forcing her to confront the emptiness of her status-driven world. In the weeks that followed, she had sought John out, her apology clumsy but heartfelt. He'd waved it off with a gentle, "Folks make mistakes, Ms. Wentworth. It's what you do after that counts." Those words had become her guide, pushing her to redefine her life. Amelia had stepped away from the social circuit, trading cocktail parties for volunteer hours at the library's planning meetings. She learned the names of single mothers who relied on the library's free tutoring, met teens who saw the computer lab as their ticket to a better future, and listened to stories of resilience that humbled her. These experiences dismantled her old measures of worth, designer gowns, exclusive invitations, and replaced them with a deeper understanding of value, one rooted in connection and service. Today, as she guided kids through the gardening workshop she'd organized, Amelia felt a sense of purpose she'd never known. She'd even persuaded Evelyn and Lillian to volunteer, though their pristine outfits and hesitant steps betrayed their unease in this unpolished setting. "This is different," Evelyn had whispered earlier, eyeing a muddy patch. Amelia had grinned. "Different's good. Stick with it." Her friends were still adjusting, but Amelia was all in her transformation, as tangible as the marigolds taking root. John, meanwhile, moved through the crowd with his trademark humility, chatting with parents and high-fiving kids. His donation had funded the library's core features, the children's wing, the community hub, but his involvement went deeper. He'd spent months advocating for the mentorship program he'd proposed at the gala, securing corporate sponsors and recruiting volunteers. Dr. Ellison had shared stories of John's quiet dedication, late-night calls to finalize budgets, visits to schools to promote literacy programs, even a personal donation of books for the youngest readers. His wealth amassed through decades of savvy real estate deals was a means to an end, not a badge of superiority. As the ceremony began, Dr. Ellison took the podium, her voice ringing with conviction. "This library is a promise," she said, "a place where every child can dream, learn, and grow, no matter where they come from." The crowd, families, educators, local leaders, cheered, their pride palpable. John's speech was short, his drawl wrapping the room in warmth. "This place ain't about the money," he said, gesturing to the kids in the front row. "It's about them, our future. We just gave 'em a starting point." His humility resonated, but Amelia saw the flicker of personal triumph in his eyes, a nod to his own journey from a small-town kid to a man who could change lives. After the kids cut the ribbon, their faces alight with importance, the crowd explored the library. Amelia found John in the courtyard showing Lila how to water her marigold. She took a breath and approached. "Mr. Kennedy," she said, her voice steady but earnest. "I was wrong about you that night. I judged you by your clothes, your accent, everything superficial. You could have humiliated me, but You didn't. Why? John stood brushing soil from his jeans, his smile kind but piercing. Didn't need to, Miss Wentworth. You saw the truth yourself, and now you're here, making a difference. That's worth more than any gotcha moment. Amelia's eyes stung her old self, seeming like a stranger. This place, these kids, they've changed me, she said. But you started it. You showed me what matters. John's gaze softened, drifting to Lila, who was proudly showing her plant to a friend. Kids have a way of doing that, he said. They don't care about your bank account or your last name. They just want you to see 'em, to believe in 'em. That's the real work. Amelia nodded, the weight of his words settling deep. She thought of the gala, how she'd measured worth by appearances, never imagining that true value lay in actions like John's, steady, selfless, transformative. It's not easy unlearning all that she admitted. John's smile was wry. Nothing worth doing is, but you're doing it. The ceremony ended with a children's reading circle. Lila and her friends sprawled on colorful rugs as a volunteer read about ocean adventures. John sat among them, his jeans streaked with dirt, his presence a quiet anchor. Amelia watched from the courtyard, helping clean up the gardening supplies, her heart full. Evelyn and Lillian, still awkward but trying, joined her, their small steps a sign of change. The library was more than a building. It was a testament to the power of seeing beyond surfaces, of choosing substance over show. For Amelia, the lesson was profound. True worth lies not in wealth or status, but in the impact we make, the kindness we extend, the lives we touch. John's example, his wealth quietly wielded his humility. Fiercely authentic, had shown her that anyone from a senator to a volunteer could build a legacy through action. Lesson for the listener. This story reminds us that judging others by appearances, clothes, accents, or social standing obscures their true value. John Kennedy's generosity and humility teach us that worth is measured by what we give, not what we have. Let's strive to see people for who they are, to act with compassion, and to contribute to our communities, knowing that even small efforts can create ripples of change.